Hello, everyone, and welcome. Such a pleasure to have you all here in attendance today. My name is Vianney Lubis. I am the Vice President of Guerrero Media's Hispanic Division, which is the publisher of Hispanic Executive. And I'm so excited to welcome you all to our event today in collaboration with our wonderful partners at Capital One, who I want to first formally thank for their longstanding partnership and for their continued commitment to the Latino business community. So at Hispanic Executive, we bring, leaders together across industries, across functions to, share their stories, learn from each other and connect. And that's why we're here today. But we're also here to commemorate my favorite issue of the year, which is our signature Leading Latinas issue, where we honor and celebrate exemplary Latinas who are at the top of their game. And this is now our 4th annual edition. And it's especially significant this year, I think, for several reasons, right? For one, Latina leaders and all women, frankly, have faced even more challenges this year due to the ongoing pandemic, as caretakers, as working mothers, as inspiring business leaders. It's been quite a year. But 2 other reasons why this particular issue was so special for us: we got to work very closely with our incredible cover star, Honest Company co-founder Jessica Alba. We had the opportunity to highlight a side of her story that isn't often shared by the mainstream media, and that was a privilege for sure. And the other is the theme of allyship that we really see in this issue. For the first time ever, actually, we highlighted non-Latinos to really sort of share their perspective in working extremely hard to elevate our Latino professionals in our community at large. So it was a very special issue, and very excited to share it with you all here today. So for today's event, we are so thrilled that 2 of our leading Latinas featured are here with us today: Eva de la Rosa, the head of global network marketing for Citi, and Hortencia Banuelos, who is a finance veteran now sitting and serving on the board of Every Child Succeeds. And joining them for the panel discussion is a dear friend, Cinthia Lopez, the Vice President of Human Resources at Capital One. And they'll be interviewed by Jennifer Lopez, who is the Vice President of Product Development and the head of the Innovation Lab, also at Capital One. And Jennifer, we actually featured the other famous Jennifer Lopez's sister in this very issue. Her name is Linda Lopez, so she's fantastic. So all in great company. Now, a couple quick housekeeping points, and then I promise to turn it over. After our panel discussion, we are excited to have an opportunity to get to know one another through this intimate setting. We've sort of created this space in hopes that you will be free to share your experiences. We definitely want to hear your stories. We encourage you to certainly ask your questions, of course, but feel free to also share any lessons or challenges that you've had to overcome this past year. And then I also want to point out that we will be recording just the panel discussion, but we'll stop there. We'll stop the recording afterwards for the roundtable dialogue. Lastly, use the chat function throughout the event. Feel free to react, ask questions. We will be monitoring that closely. And so with that, I want to give our speakers as much time as possible so we can get started. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator, Jennifer Lopez.
Thank you, Vianney. It is always fun to participate with Hispanic Executive. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm looking at the participant list grow, and it's really exciting. It's always exciting to be in a room of exceptional Latinas, but we also have allies with us today, which I think is a really lovely combination. So as Vianney mentioned, we're going to have a 2-part discussion. We're going to have a part 1 panel discussion with Hortencia and Eva and Cinthia, and we're going to hear about their experience in the last year, thoughts they have. They're going to be fantastic. I know it for sure. They're going to offer you lots of inspiration, but this is a participatory sport. The second half of our discussion really is going to be with all of you. So how are we all doing in this moment in time? How do we all step up our leadership game as Latinas? And what can this community do to support each other, listen to the experiences that we're having, and really show up as Latina leaders? So I urge you, as you're listening to these conversations, as you're listening to the dialogue, jot down a question you have. Make a note of a thought that you've had. this is a tribe of people that really want to help you and want to have these really robust discussions. So halfway through, we'll pivot over, we'll have that discussion time. But why don't we get to know our guests for today? So Vianney mentioned we've got Hortencia Banuelos, who is currently the board member and finance committee member for Every Child Succeeds. She also was formerly the senior vice president and chief financial officer for a line of business at Third Fifth Bank. We've got Eva de la Rosa. She's the head of global network marketing for the Global Consumer Bank at Citi. And then my colleague and dear friend, Cinthia Lopez. She's the vice president of human resources and head of university and campus recruiting programs at Capital One. They have a lot to share, so let's dig in. I remember growing up always thinking that it was a really good thing that I never got in trouble at school. I was never in trouble for poor behavior. My parents, Latinos, taught me to follow the rules, to be good, to be quiet, to be humble, to not bring a lot of attention to myself. And I'd argue probably many of you on the line have similar stories. But when I think about what it takes to be successful in corporate America, being unseen and unheard are definitely not qualities that top that list. So I want to talk to the panel today on how Latinas really authentically can show up, but also be heard and be ourselves and be effective in the leaders that we already are. So I'd love to throw it out, Cinthia, Hortencia, and Eva. How do you show up as Latina leaders and maybe go against some of the things you might have been taught growing up? Thoughts?
Can go first if you want. Yeah, I think that times have changed. Yeah, times have changed really. From the time that I joined the workforce in United States, coming from Mexico, it's different from now. And I am very thankful that that happened, because at the time that I came, like you said, our culture let us thought that we cannot speak up, that we cannot like raise our voice, that we can have to address everybody by Mr. or Mrs. We cannot talk by name, by first names, and people can identify with that culture. But I think once that you get into the business culture, then you are showing that you know what you are talking about, and you really have to take your place and speak up. But only speak up when you have something to say. Don't speak up for the sake of saying something. So for me, the first time that I did is I tried to understand the culture, trying to immerse in the culture, and then from there, I didn't want to lose my identity of who I was, where I came from. So for me, it was very important to show them who I was coming from and where I was coming from and what can I do for the team. And with that, I begin to learn how to be part of the team. So that's for me. It was really speak up only when you need to speak up, understand the team, and offer them your perspective.
And I would love to share as well. It's very interesting. I'm from Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and I think many of us could relate. Like, we were raised by incredibly powerful Latina mommies, right? Like, who told us we can do anything, we can be anything, and they were going to be like 100% behind us the entire way. But at the same time, we grew up with everything is gracias a Dios, right? Like, thank God. Everything is si Dios lo permite, God willing. And it's almost like with all of that, you have to be so grateful for where you are. And I think that's a little bit of what makes our culture magical, right? Like, we are happy in most circumstances. But I really struggled in the corporate environment because that to me translated of like, I am so grateful I got a job that sponsored my visa. I am so grateful, right? Like, I get a paycheck. I am so grateful I got this promotion. But it was almost like waiting for the thing to happen to me. And I remember having a conversation with an executive coach recently about, like, I think for me, the word ambition is negative. If I ever think, he was like, I think you're ambitious. I'm like, no, please don't use that word. And in my head, ambition is wanting for something that you don't have. And we even had to go to like the Oxford definition and like, is it a negative connotation or not? And it's interesting because if you guys look at it, sometimes it'll say like ardent desire for rank or fame, which to me is like, that's not what I want. But then there's also a definition that says a strong desire to do or achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work. And I was like, oh, that version of ambition, like I want to be. And even getting comfortable of, it was never about doubting my ability or capability. It was around like being declarative about I'm going for it. And everyone should know that I'm going for it. But it took a lot of work and I still struggle with it. Sometimes, can I go to the next level? Should I want it? And you know, it's really interesting. So it's a work in progress, but I am hopeful. And there's so many leading Latinas here, and we just need to get comfortable and embrace our power and work together towards it.
And I would agree, you know, with what's shared so far really resonates with me in so many ways, and I'm happy to share my thoughts and experience as well. And so, you know, I think for me, you know, leading by example has always been very important. You know, really staying true with my, you know, closely held values of integrity and respect and honesty and compassion. And for me, those values are not negotiable. So it's been an anchor that's allowed me to, you know, take calculated risks and challenge the status quo. But I would say those are values that my Mexican parents instilled in me. And, you know, we didn't grow up with a lot of privilege, but, you know, similar to what was shared, I was just so grateful for opportunities. And as I got opportunities, I felt a strong sense of obligation to pull others along with me. And as Hortencia says, you know, speaking up and being firm, not for its own sake, but because there's more at stake there. And so for me, that anchor, you know, of humility really comes from a desire and a dedication to help others, especially in our community, but certainly, you know, at large. And I know we'll be talking about allyship a little bit later, but, you know, part of us having a seat at the table, as I say, is bringing others along with us and not forgetting where we came from. And so again, anchoring to my values, they're not negotiable, taking calculated risks where I think the trade-off, whether good or bad, is something that I could live with, but always, you know, sticking to my sense of humility, which I actually think is a great strength and will and character. And great traits of leadership, which oftentimes I don't understand why humility is viewed as mutually exclusive from being strong. It's a sentiment that I literally don't understand, but, you know, one that I've lived with. And so those are my general thoughts.
I love these stories of like really deeply understanding the values that were instilled in us and how we are able to show up in them every day. And Eva, I think you talked about something that was very interesting, which is the obligation to pull up others. We all talked about our narratives, right? What are the narratives we have? How do we embrace our power? How do we show up and tell our stories? But another power we can wield is to elevate others, especially other powerful Latinas. And I think that feels like it's a newer part of the discussion of like explicitly saying, I'm gonna elevate and talk about the amazingness of other Latinas or other underrepresented groups and really use our power to do that. Cinthia, can you talk to us a little bit about how elevating others has been a part of your career and how you've been able to do it, particularly if you've been able to elevate other Latinas?
Yes, so I think, you know, Eva's word of responsibility, like kind of really resonated with me. I do think there's so much responsibility for us to give back. And I think it starts with, you know, I love the theme of the Leading Latinas issue from Hispanic Executive, because so much, you know, I lead campus and university recruiting. And as we think about first gen students, right, like really increasing Latinx representation in STEM fields, you know, starts with, if you can see it, you can be it, right? Like, and this thought of like, wow, sometimes it'll be us. And it's literally, right, like this year, it's Eva and Hortencia and so many others that people are seeing. And I'm like, I can be it, right? Like, and then the responsibility that comes with paying that forward. I've been lucky. I've been at Capital One my entire career. I have never worked anywhere else. But one of our corporate values is literally elevate others. And I think it was so ingrained in our culture that how you win is through elevating others. And it's because people who want to work with you and for you as you do that. But I have been the recipient of that. And I know how powerful it is. And there's an intersectionality in Latinas, right? Like we're females and we're Latinas, and like we have a responsibility to do both of those things. And we have a commitment to do. So I love, personally knowing that I have like 3 folks right now that I'm watching, and I'm like, I'm going to be the one, at their corner when new opportunities come up, and like, have you thought of this person? Have you thought of this person? And also now in like, just like my day job, right? Like, how can I continue to bring Latinas through our campus and professional ranks? So really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, Cinthia, you talk about this elevating others and how it's part of the larger team. And if you elevate others, people want to be on your team. I don't know about all of you, but I've had to hire people and start new partnerships on my teams in this environment where we're all Zoom windows on a screen. And it's really hard to build that culture and trust and, like relationship, I think, in this remote environment. So I'd love to talk about the realities of what's going on in this moment in time and how we're building trust. Hortencia, I'd love to hear how you're doing that in this remote environment, and then what behaviors you might take back if we ever go back to the office.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the key things that they have to happen when we move to a remote environment is that you have to be a good leader and have already had the trust of your team, and they have to know that you have the best interest in you. First, I think that the hardest part is to keep them engaged, and also one of the things that we saw is the burnout. People were working more hours. And the situations for each one of the employees were different. I had somebody that just was going to have a baby, another one that I hired, and then 2 weeks later we went to work remote. And then I have somebody that had his mother-in-law living with him, and he was worried about it. And then I have the young professional that he didn't want to be working from home. He wanted to go to the office so he can socialize. So the approach was really to communicate with them, to be in touch with them one by one. My team, my directs, they had their meetings and continue with the normal meetings. But also I wanted to touch base with them and show them empathy. So show them that we care about their special situation, that we wanted to help because we know that maybe they didn't have an office, maybe they didn't have the equipment, maybe they couldn't work the hours because they didn't have daycare. So giving them flexible hours, and it was something that worked for them. I wanted them not to feel guilty of not being exactly, or maybe having the dog bark in the back, or maybe having the baby on the lap. So it was a completely different environment. And then also telling them that don't feel bad if you feel like you are not working the normal hours. People will log in the morning, will log at night. And that's one thing that we are going to bring back to the office is going to be the flexibility. I think that we have learned a big lesson on that work is not necessarily from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. Is something that you set up the rules for the employees. If they comply with them, then you should be okay. So performance, set clear expectations, and be flexible, I think is key for this remote environment, and the empathy that we need to show as leaders.
Yeah, Hortencia, you showcase all the things that are totally different, including I have a cat who has decided to sit on my lap during this call, and I think he's going to stay there the whole time. So he's going to be with us. We can't control what's going on in our homes to some degree. And a lot of things about how we work are different. One of the things that I know to be different is normally we'd have sessions like this together, and we'd actually be in a room together and have this discussion and then have a cocktail and chat. And I will say, like, for a long time, networking events like that made me really nervous. So even though I lament for that time when we were all together, I remember some of those emotions of being nervous, but recognizing over time that building my career and building my network was so very important. I want to talk about networking because I do believe it's so very important. I want to figure out, how do we actually think about authentically building our professional network? And doing so, even if sometimes we're a little anxious or scared about it. Maybe in this remote environment, it's a little different. So Eva, do you have any pointers on how did you authentically build your network, and how are you still building your network now?
Yes, definitely happy to share. I think it's extremely important in general, but probably ever more so in this environment, right? Where we're now saddling both, soon enough, in person and remote. And I'll have to confess that earlier in my career, when I was younger, networking was just something and a word that I would cringe, because there's something that for some reason I believe was not entirely authentic, or that I was just asking for stuff. And, it took me a while to develop my own sense of comfort and understanding of what networking means. And so I'm happy to share what's worked for me and some of the tips that I pass along. One, and this is fundamental, I think that networking is about both giving and receiving. So it's a two-way street. It's fundamentally about fostering relationships, and networking takes time, right? So being sincere with one's intent with interacting and meeting and networking is really important, because it gives you credibility, I think, with pretty much everyone that you meet. And people, we all network for a variety of reasons, whether it's to find a mentor, looking for a new job, advocating for a social cause, looking for a solution to a problem, you name it, right? There's so many reasons why we need a strong network. But ultimately, if whatever your intent and result is, the network can't just be built overnight. In my perspective, it needs to be nurtured, and it's a long-term game, if you will. And I fundamentally believe that the more you give, the more you get, actually. So when you're meeting people, be genuine with your intent. Whether you're going to a business networking event or meeting a new contact for coffee, be helpful. Again, it's a two-way street, and help them solve a problem, or listen to them and what they have to say. Ask questions. If they're new to the area, learn more about what they're interested in, and give them tips, or connect them with one of your friends or neighbors. It doesn't take a lot, actually, to give. And so be a resource and follow through. That's really important. I've been in situations where people, reach out to me, and on average, it's typically, for career related stuff, and I'm happy to help. But I find that in some situations, because I'm invested, right? It's something that I'm passionate about. After I share or provide what they requested, they kind of disappear, right? So that's not really a great way to build your network, because what I'll remember is that I never heard back. So that's just something to think about, in terms of tips that I, try to apply for myself, is focus again on giving versus just getting. Be present and focused, and the person that you're talking to. Listen more than you talk. Think long-term versus short-term. Ask questions that will start an open dialogue. And importantly, don't overcommit. Don't say, I'm going to do this, that, and the other, and then not follow through. And then lastly, I'm a firm believer in quality versus quantity. So those are my thoughts on networking. And again, just, a process for me that I learned over time, and something that I wasn't initially comfortable with. But when I found the authenticity in it, and the equation of giving and receiving, then it's something that is really, important to me, and that I leverage with some frequency.
Eva, those are awesome tips. And Darlene, thanks for dropping some tips in the chat. That is exactly what we're talking about here. How do we actually create these dynamic discussions? How do we all support each other? So we're going to pivot into the second half of our discussion, where we're going to open it up. So